Soon. But I'd like to welcome you to our first Lunch and Learn bite-size workshop. And today we have the fabulous Kris. I'm just going to share a brief introduction of who Kris is, and then we're going to crack straight on. So Kris Nelson is an experienced Toastmaster who's discovered all kinds of amazing joys in her Toastmasters journey. Key among these is the incredible variety of potential speech topics and the fun she has in exploring these details. Writing speeches is one of Kris's favourite parts of speaking, and she keeps a spreadsheet list of over 200 topics to inspire her. Beautiful. That sounds interesting. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kris, who is going to be presenting how to write a speech in 20 minutes. Over to you, Kris.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I am always amazed at how much people worry about writing speeches. I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what to find. I don't know how to write it. It takes me so long to write a speech. Because in my mind, it doesn't have to. Writing a speech can be relatively quick, relatively seamless, and a lot of fun. And that's what we're going to focus on today. The first challenge really is for a lot of people what to talk about. And I am just quickly looking for my list of speech topics because for whatever reason it is not appearing in a friendly way here. So we'll try that and I will show it to you. I'm a spreadsheet person, and so I have a tendency to keep spreadsheets of a whole lot of things. One of those, of course, is speech topics. Here's how it works. When I'm talking to somebody and they say something like, I can't believe somebody did that, that twicks in my mind that, oh, hey, I could talk about that. When I have an opinion about something, like why on earth don't people learn to drive in the winter in Canada where it snows? I have an opinion about that. I could talk about that. When I remember something like a story about my youngest son that's just really cute, I think I could talk about that. Somebody once said, boy, there's a lot of zeros in that number. And I thought, oh, zeros are really cool when they follow a number, especially when it's a positive one going into your bank account. But zeros don't really mean much by themselves. They're zeros. Zeros matter based on what they're following. And I thought, hey, I could talk about that. So the first thing I want you to look at, and I'd love for you to get out a piece of paper or open a document on your computer, and I want you to draft a speech during this workshop. So get something open, get a piece of paper or have a document open, and let's be ready. And Darlene, I see you're off camera. That's okay, but I'd love for you to engage as much as you can anyways. What are you excited about? What do you enjoy? What do you have a strong opinion on? Is there a soapbox you're always getting on to talk about something? I can't believe people do this. This is so important. Why don't more people know this? Oh my goodness, what's going on with the election in the United States? Whatever you're passionate about, make a few notes. Try and write down at least 3 or 4 things. Once you've done that, the next thing we're going to look at is what can you say about them? And remember, this doesn't have to be hard and it doesn't have to be fancy, and you don't have to worry about, is someone else going to be interested in what I like? Because chances are someone is going to find it interesting. How often have you heard somebody else's speech and thought, oh, that gives me an idea? I'm not the only person who's done that, right? I do that a lot. I'll hear somebody else's topic and what they talk about, and I might get 4 ideas of speech topics from listening to someone else. Maybe because I agree or disagree, but sometimes just because it prompts another idea. So right now, I want you to pick one of your ideas and write down at least 3 things you could talk about related to one of your ideas. So if you talked about why rabbits make the best pets, you might choose something like they're quiet, They don't have to take up a whole pile of space or get poop scooped in the backyard like a dog does. And they're very low maintenance. So think about your 3 points. Let's write them down. Looks like everybody's busy thinking. I love that. I'm going to give you 1 more minute to finish thinking, and then we're going to move on. All right. Looks like everybody's ready. Was it really hard to find 3 things to say about one of your topics, or not so
A little
bad?
bit hard to find the third item. I had to struggle for that third item. The first two popped into my mind fairly quickly.
Okay. Sometimes that's it. And sometimes you're just going to take one of those and expand on it. The next thing I want you to do is to take each of those 3 items and write down at least 1 or 2 things you might say about them. So it might be a story that talks about that item. It might be something that explains it more. It might be an example or something funny. Might be an opinion. Build out all 3 of those points. Was that part just really easy, Leon, or are you just thinking hard?
No, I've just made 2 notes. Didn't mean to note 2 items. It's too hard for me to do right now.
Okay, I will permit that, but
All
it's
right.
not as hard as you think. See if you can come up with something. You've got a minute or two. Okay, we're going to have 1 more minute for those notes. All right. I want you now to have a look at the information you've written down. Is it in the right order? Does the order make sense? Or would you move things around? Take a second, have a look at that, and mark your main points 1, 2, and 3 based on the order you think they make the most sense. Looks like that's quick for some people and more thought-provoking for others. Everybody feel okay about the points they have? You feel comfortable with those? Okay, good. Next, I want you to think about what is the point of what you're talking about? What's the purpose of your speech? Are you educating? Are you informing? Are you entertaining? What are you sharing? Are you inspiring? And with that in mind, think about what do you want the audience to take away from your speech? Write yourself a bit of a conclusion. And if appropriate, include a call to action. Doesn't have to be in sentences. Point form is okay if that's what works for you. Okay, everybody good? Look at your conclusion and look at the point you wanted to make. Look at the body of your speech, because that's what you've just written, and the points you're giving. Now, how should you lead into this? What is going to start off getting your audience's attention? Remembering, of course, that we don't want to just start off with something boring. Today, I'm going to talk to you about why rabbits are a great pet, because snooze fest. You want to get attention, and you can do that with a question. That's a popular way. But make sure it's a question that relates to your audience and that gets them thinking. You can do it with a statement. Something shocking is always good. Or you can do it with an action. What's best for your speech, and how are you going to move from that hook into what you're talking about? Take a couple minutes and do that. Okay, are we ready? You've had 10 minutes. How many people basically have a speech? Was that really hard or not so bad?
No.
Okay, what changed?
You.
Oh, okay. Great. Can we put me in a bottle and market me for a really high price?
Absolutely.
That's the point. If you deconstruct it so it's less intimidating, it's not as hard, right? It just makes it a little more approachable. Do you think you could apply this to pretty much any topic? Sometimes you might even just, as I do, have a story and use the story as the middle part, so it's already there and done, and wrap the rest around it. One speech I've done a number of times is about my daughter when she was 5, being absolutely crushed at one of those restaurants where they sing for your birthday, because they'd sang for her birthday a few months before, and she was 5, and in love with their song, Who's the Prettiest Girl in Town? When we went back a few months later, they sang that song to someone else. And if you have children, you can imagine how that went. I don't need to write down the story or the points. I know the story. It was 27 years ago, but I know the story, and it still embarrasses my daughter. All I have to do when I give that speech is think about who am I talking to and how do I want to bring them into the story? And how do I want to wrap that up? And how do I want to pull out my message of little things can make a really big difference effectively for this audience? You have stories too. When I spoke at my son's wedding, I told stories about him being warm, physically and metaphorically. He was a little furnace, and I started off with that and wove through to his warmness as a person and who he is, and how he applies that to his wife, who had just become a doctor. You don't have to make it hard. You can look at stories with a common theme in your life. You can find things that are important to you. You can look at all kinds of things that relate to your life or that have an opinion. I've done speeches on people who leave grocery carts in the middle of the aisle. You know those people, right? Please tell me you're not those people. It can be that easy because what do you read into that grocery cart in the middle of the aisle? What you read in might not be identical to what I do, and none of it's probably what the person who left it there genuinely intended. You have options. And I'm going to show you the sheet because it's a popular sheet. This is the list. And as you can see, it goes on and on and on.
What is the second column for?
The second column is where I put what I want to do with the speech.
Okay.
So I've got keynotes beside a couple of them. And I've got, this is the one about my daughter and the song. Sometimes I put notes here just to remind me of things. Sometimes I put notes about where I want to explore that or what I want to reference, but a lot of the time it's the kind of speech it's going to become. Somebody's in chat. You like that, Tisha? I'm glad. Here's the thing. My list is about 300 items long.
Wow.
I've done some of those speeches, and some of them I take and I do them again and I wrap them into something else. I'm doing a speech as a test speaker at a club tomorrow night, and it's a speech I've done twice before, once as a 5 to 7 minute speech and once as a keynote, about how we present ourselves and how we really are. It's called On Paper, and it has to do with people who have pieces of paper that say they can do things that they really can't do. And how who you are is a lot more important than whatever letters or papers or fancy things you might attach to yourself. The person you are and the person you act is more important. But I can take that speech and do a whole lot of things with it. And it's a bit different every time. Sometimes I'll take a shorter speech or story and drop it into a keynote, or take a couple of related speeches and build them into a bigger speech if I need to talk about something. Parts of a speech might wind up in parts of another speech. There's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with taking a speech you did 2 or 3 years ago or 10 years ago and looking at, what have I learned from this speech? How have I done this differently? What am I going to change? How am I wrapping this into my life and my learning and my leadership and speaking now? And doing that. Something I decided recently, I just celebrated 10 years in Toastmasters. And I did my first icebreaker 10 years ago this November, because it took me 2.5 months to work up my nerve. And I plan to revisit that icebreaker sometime in November, probably as part of a keynote about what I've changed and learned and grown since then, and what parts of my life have continued to follow that pattern. So there's a lot of things you can do with speeches. We're at about 16 minutes now into how to write a speech. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be time consuming. It doesn't have to be complicated. And depending on who you are and how you think, it doesn't even have to be on paper. I write speeches in my head sometimes. Please tell me I'm not the only person who does that. One of the best speeches that I think I've done that I've used a few times is called Pick Me Up. And I wrote it on my way to a club meeting in my car while I was driving in about 20 minutes, because we'd had a couple speakers drop out that night and we needed a speech. And so I wrote a speech about a little black dress. Pick Me Up has a few connotations and they all weave through the speech. Like a lot of things, it changes each time I give it, but it's got a message through it that stays the same. And I wrote it in my head based on a simple memory of one evening and one dress and a pair of black lace-up stilettos that I remembered randomly in my car and made into a speech with a lesson of sometimes you just need a little something to help you keep going. It's okay to find what helps you keep going and to give yourself that gift. It's a really basic message. But the fact that I wrap it in a story with a dress that I definitely would not wear now makes it an awful lot more fun and a lot more engaging. You have stories in your life. You have opinions. You have things you complain about, things you think about or worry about, funny things your kids or your partners or your colleagues say, or something somebody does that you look at and go, what on earth were they thinking? I'm not the only person who whispers that, right? All of those things can be a speech. Once you know what you want to talk about, I hope you've gotten the idea now that making it into a speech is a lot easier than you think. Break it down. Is it a story? Do you need to write down 3 things about it? How are you breaking those points out? How do you move from one point to another? And how do you wrap it up and leave the audience with a gift of value? And how are you going to start that? Who wants to tell me about what they wrote or do a speech from what they wrote? You all just wrote a speech. Who wants to do one? Oh, come on, it's not that bad. You've all been in this position. I've been in this position.
I'm sure JKK Rowling says the same thing. Oh, come on. How hard is it to write a story?
Yeah, it can be and it can't be. Sometimes it is, and sometimes they just flow, and there are totally hard parts. But you've all just sat here and in 20 minutes written yourself a speech. Let's see what you came up with and test the theory. You can prove me right, or you can prove me wrong. Mary Lou, go for it.
All right. Do you eat the same salad every day, or do you experiment? How do you make a salad? Everyone looks at each other and says, well, my favorite salad is a green salad. But what does that mean? A green salad, is it bitter? Is it sweet? Is it neutral? What do you add to it? Do you add nuts? Do you add other vegetables and fruits? Do you add, let me see my notes, cheese and other treats? What is it that tickles your taste buds to make you want to make a salad? Make it a little different. But don't forget, the crowning glory is the salad dressing. Do you like it tart with a little bit of zing? Or do you like it sweet? Or do you like it creamy? There's so many options to having a salad. Why stick with the same old thing? Experiment and have a wonderful smorgasbord of delicious salads every week. That's it.
Amazing.
I love that, Mary Lou. That is fabulous. I love experimenting with salads too. And I related to your speech immediately. You engaged us well, and you made sense as you wandered through, and you left us with a good thought-provoking conclusion. As you move forward, obviously, if you were going to present that speech, you might think about how you could build this out, talk about some more, give examples of salads you've loved, maybe engage the audience, but you've got scope to do so much with that. That is an amazing example. Who else wants to try? We got time for one more.
I don't mind going. I'm going to educate you on. So, did you know that the Yarmouth to Lymington ferry route is the most expensive ferry crossing in the world? I live on the Isle of Wight, and we really struggle with our ferry company because sometimes in the summer it can be up to £200 just to get from one side, the mainland, over to the island. So that really impacts families So if you've got family on the island and you've got people on the mainland, that is going to really be a problem. The local economy and jobs. And I think there's a bigger impact there. But the key takeaway is don't let a strip of water impact your family life. You've got FaceTime, Zoom, connect that way. So in a nutshell, I could probably write a speech about the Isle of Wight and really have a good old rant. So thank you for the inspiration, Kris.
Excellent. Thank you, Natalie. You've got the great bones of a speech there. I know you haven't built it out as much as you might, but you've got a really good path to a start on that speech. That is fun. And yeah, I mean, here in Toronto, we have the 407, which I think is probably the most or one of the most expensive toll highways per kilometer in the world. It's definitely a lot more expensive per kilometer than the toll highways in the US or in most places.
It
And
is. I've researched
take it
that one.
anyways. Because we get to miss Toronto. I think we've had a lot of fun. We've got some great ideas. Have you had fun? Everybody had fun?
Absolutely.
All right.
is
My
excellent.
call to action for all of you, set yourself up a list, whether it's in a notebook, in a spreadsheet, on a Word document, in the Notes app, in your phone, wherever it's handy for you, make it something you have with you all the time. So something little that fits in your purse or tucks into the side pocket of your car, have it handy. Every time you have an idea, write it down. You're going to be amazed how quickly you too get to 300 speech ideas.
Thank you, Kris.
Thank you very much.
Hope this has been really inspiring. I have taken from Kris's speech presentation a role to potentially put into a club. So obviously, Kris, you were talking about like rabbits or whatever. I was thinking have a soapbox role. So say, for example, you could do a maybe 2 to 3 minute shorter speech on something that drives you absolutely nuts. Because I think speaking can be, like Kris has said, anything. And I think sometimes you need to have that space just to rant about people leaving their trolleys in the middle of an aisle, ferries, and other stuff that drives people nuts. See, I thank you, Kris, for teaching us how to write a speech in a very short amount of time. Probably got time for maybe 2 questions if you've got anything for Kris before we wrap up at past. Does anybody have any questions for Kris whilst we're all together still?
I do.
Okay.
Can you possibly include a link so we can all watch the video and recap some of her thoughts?
So this is recorded. So what I'll
Yeah.
do, let me, because I'll be able to pull the emails from the registration. When I get the recording, what I should get very soon, I'll email the link back out.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
No props.
How do you incorporate what you presented to us when your project is about research? I get into trouble when I have to research something and I want to have the fact and get it right and quote, and then there goes my whole notes because I'm reading.
Okay. I love research. I'm that person who collects textbooks. What I do is I break it down that same way. What are the 3 main bodies of information that I'm talking about in the speech? So if you're researching why do leaves change color, you might look at chlorophyll, at weather, and at climate or geographical position or types of trees. You pick your 3 things, you make 3 points about each one of them. Don't try to memorize the whole speech. This is a whole different workshop. But instead of memorizing the speech, memorize the key points and the order. You know the rest. You
I
don't
have a
have to
question.
memorize every word. Sometimes there are words you want to memorize so that you say things a certain way, but there are a lot of things that will flow naturally for you. Let them. Mary Lou.
Just one thing to add to that for Tisha is when you're giving a speech, you need to try and remember what is it that you actually want to leave with your audience. Yeah, you have this, massive amount of information, but you have to synthesize it down to really the points that are really important that you want to leave with them. Not everything, but here are the key points.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for attending this bite-sized workshop, because I think sometimes you can get a lot of learning in a little bit of time. So it's been lovely to meet you all. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and the rest of your lunchtime.
Before you go, can I ask one question?
Go for it.
With the new Pathways program, there's kind of a topic they want you to talk to. How do you squeeze your speech to match the topic of the project?
That's a whole separate workshop, but there are ways to do it. If you think about what your theme is, for example, mentoring, I've done probably 10 different speeches on mentoring. I've done all kinds of paths. Natalie's done even more. What can you talk about? What story do you have that gives that example? Mentoring is hard because it talks about how Toastmasters envisions mentoring. Sorry. But when I've done I'm sorry. When I've done multiple speeches on it, I move past the basics and talk about amazing values in mentorship that I've seen as a mentor or a mentee, or really terrible mentoring relationships that I've seen, because I've seen some of those too. Pick the theme, look at the point of the project.